coming to him not just like a jigsaw puzzle, but like a jigsaw puzzle backwards. Can you imagine somebody turning a jigsaw puzzle upside down and asking you to put these pieces together? You might spend the rest of your life trying to figure that one out. So that's how it came. He didn't know what the final product was going to be. He just did it. So what you find actually in the final mix, you will find in chapters which are mostly from Medina, some verses from Mecca. And in chapters which are mostly from Mecca, verses from Medina. You'll find that mixture. Sometimes you do find a chapter which is purely Meccan and one which is purely Medina, but you also find that mixture. And this also points towards the miracle of the Quran, because of the fact that when a writer writes, his style changes over his period of writing. If you look at his early writings and look at his later writing, you can see a difference in style. You can detect it. It's clear. Whereas when we look at those Meccan surahs with Medinan verses and Medinan surahs with Meccan verses, it's as if these verses were meant to be there right from the beginning. There is a consistency there, meaning that this is not from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's not from him. Because were it his own writings, then there would be a visible and discernible change in style as time passes. Now, what does all this mean in terms of importance? It has to do with us understanding the legal pronouncements of the Quran. That these legal pronouncements in a number of cases came gradually. So you had verses which said, for example, concerning alcohol, Allah says there, when they ask you about alcohol and gambling, tell them that they contain benefit for some people, but the sin is greater than the benefit. Then you have another verse which says, don't come to prayer when you're in a state of intoxication until you know what you're saying. Then you also have a verse which says, indeed, alcohol, gambling, sacrificial altars, and divination are filth from the work of Satan, so stay away from them. These are the three grades in which the verses came. And we only know the correct order by knowing whether they were Meccan, whether they were Medinan, and what phase they came. Because if it was left up to us to just read these verses and determine which order they came, we could just as well have said that Allah at first prohibited alcohol completely. When people got used to it, then He relaxed a bit and said, don't drink at Salah time. And after people were used to that, then He said, it's got harm in it. The harm is greater than the good, but if you can handle it, don't worry about it. Right? And you have people who argue this because they don't know. They're ignorant. Secondly, we get from the verses the methodology of da'wah. Allah explains in there how the da'wah should be taken to the people, how to approach people from various backgrounds, and what kind of reasonings we should use, what kind of words we should use, etc., etc. So by knowing the phases at which it came, we can know what is the appropriate type of arguments, etc., to use when you're dealing with a Meccan type situation, when you're dealing with a Medinan type situation. This trains us in da'wah. And finally, the knowledge of the Meccan and Medinan verses also helps give us something of the biography of the Prophet ﷺ, because his life is also contained in the Quran itself. As I said, it addressed different issues that were going on in his life, so you find some of the biography, the incidents from the life of the Prophet ﷺ are mentioned in the Quran. By knowing which ones are from the Meccan period, which ones are from the Medinan period, the early Meccan, later Meccan, early Medinan, later Medinan, we're able to also sketch out a general description of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ's life. So, scholars divided up the verses of the Quran into Meccan and Medinan to analyze the content of the Quran, as well as to some degree look at the structure of the Quranic verses themselves. The benefit of this knowledge is, on one hand, to understand the main focus of the Quranic texts. What are the major topics of the Quran? And secondly, it is to also guide us in terms of what to focus on in da'wah. If we're in a Meccan type circumstance, what are the key things? Tawheed, Salah. These are the key things to focus on. If we're in a Medinan type situation, or we've graduated from the Meccan type foundation, then we focus on the laws. Get all of those laws into place. And we said it helps us to understand how to apply a number of the Islamic rulings, and finally to understand the seerah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, wassalatu wassalam ala Rasulil Kareem wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa man istanna bi sunnati ila yawm ad-din. All praise is due to Allah, and may Allah's peace and blessings be on His last Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and all those who follow the path of righteousness until the last day. It's been a long day. So, inshallah, we're going to try to keep this session within the bounds of what is reasonable. First question: is the examination going to be an open book, open notebook? No. This is going to judge what degree of retention you have from what you have covered. When we leave the session, you go back in tonight, you go over the material, identify the key areas, so that when you come to do your review, your final review on Monday, you're not going to be starting from scratch, right? This is something that you probably never did in high school or junior high or college, revising, going over the material you took in the day. We always leave the revision till the last day before the final exam, then you try to study your whole course that same night. Well, it's not going to work here, right? So my advice to you is, when you go back to where you're staying tonight, go back over the material we've covered so far. I just identify, highlight, or mark in your book the key areas. Just go over them briefly tonight. Yarhamukallah. It's multiple choice. Okay? It's multiple choice. 100 questions. Only. Okay. You were talking about the city of Iram. What about the name Iram for a girl? Does it have a different meaning, or is it the same meaning? Really, I don't know. Somebody would have to tell me that one. I know I've heard of people, I think, from Pakistan. Some sisters have this name Iram. I don't know, is it from that same, but is it from the Quran? Is it that same Iramadat al-Imad? It's taken from there? Or is it a Persian word with another meaning? Possibly. Well, he's from Pakistan and he doesn't know, so don't blame me. Or if anybody can enlighten us. Paradise. It's a Persian word, is it? Iram is Persian. Oh, okay. A garden in paradise in Persian. Well, it's not in Arabic, right? And Prophet ﷺ didn't say there was a garden in paradise called Iram. So anyway, it's Persian. Have the Bible and Torah changed even more after the times of the Prophet ﷺ? And the person wrote here, the holy prophets. Watch out for this, people. We don't have a holy Quran, and we don't have holy prophets. And this is not our description. This holy Quran thing is like the holy Bible. We're imitating the Christians. We have the magnificent Quran, Al-Quran Al-Azim, right? We have the noble Quran, Al-Quran Al-Kareem. These are the descriptions which Allah has given. Let us not go and give it a description which is from Christianity, the holy Bible. Have the Bible and the Torah changed even after the times of the Prophet ﷺ? Yes. The text of the Bible changes. I mean, he was from the 7th century. Changes took place in the 7th century, in the 8th century, in the 9th century. You know, the changes were continual. Can you explain the Torah? No, but what is referred to as the New Testament, because when you say the Bible is made up of the books of the Old Testament, which are supposed to include the Torah, and the New Testament. So of the New Testament, changes have continued to take place. Of the Old Testament, it was already basically in fixed written form amongst the Jews by the 7th, 8th century. Basically, I don't think there are any major changes from that period. But writings, of course, additional writings, their tafsirs, this was an ongoing process. In fact, one of their greatest mufassirun of the Torah, he lived under Muslim rule in Spain. He spoke Arabic, and he wrote his tafsir in Arabic, of the Torah. Right? His name was Maimonides, and actually the Jews, actually great degree of a large amount of their liturgy and all that comes from him. He's really looked at as a very key figure. That shows you that really there was no intrinsic animosity between Muslims and Jews. I mean, this situation of Israel, I mean, this has created, this situation coming from their side, which has created, you know, this animosity which exists today. But in fact, Islam accepted the marriage of Jewish women, and accepted the eating of Jewish food, and Muslims protected the Jews when they were persecuted in Europe and all these other places. You know, they came under Muslim protection. When Muslims were driven out of Spain, they left Spain with the Muslims and went to Morocco and Algeria and these places. Anyway, can you explain the verse that Allah is between a man and his heart? And the hadith that a man's heart is between the two fingers of the most merciful, Ar-Rahman. Well, the verse about Allah being between a man and his heart, I mean, of course, the person is questioning the concept that we spoke about earlier about Allah being above and beyond His creation, not being a part of His creation. And we identified in it that the correct concept with regards to Allah is that He's above and beyond the creation and not mixed in, not a part of, not the creation itself. When we talk about the Wahdat al-Wujud idea, monism of Ibn Arabi, the 12th century Spaniard Sufi, who promoted the idea that Allah is everything and everything is Allah. We talked about that at length. Okay, so our verse that the person is asking about, because we mentioned that the other verse wherein Allah says He's closer to you than your jugular vein, and He explains there, we explained there that you have to put that verse in context, where Allah says that He created human beings and He knows what their souls whisper, and He's closer than your jugular vein. This is obviously indicating that it is Allah's knowledge. He knows. Similarly, when they talk about Allah coming between a man and his heart, this is talking about the power of Allah. That comes in a complete verse in which Allah says, "O believers, respond to Allah and His Messenger when they call you to what will give you life. And know well that Allah comes between a man and his heart, and to Him you will be gathered. He is in control over the whole show." Allah controls it. As Prophet ﷺ used to, favorite dua he used to make, "Ya muqallib al-qulub, thabbit qalbi ala dinik." O flipper of hearts, steady my heart on your religion. Allah controls the hearts, right, in that respect. And so the other question that the person asked, Allah's heart is between the two fingers of Ar-Rahman. This is reference again to Allah's control over all things. So we don't take this and understand from it that Allah in His essence is within His creation. Nowadays it's common for people to present each other with images of Babi Kaaba, the door of the Kaaba. I have 2 of them. What should I do about them? Because I really don't want to keep them. Well, I mean, there's nothing really special about them. If you want to give them away, give them away. I mean, it's ornamental. If a person believes that they have power, they're going to protect you in some way, shape or the other, then they've entered into shirk. Right? For some people, the curtain or the shroud which is over the Kaaba, and people get into this baraka thing, where they try to snip off pieces and wipe it on their bodies. People on the black stone, they come in there, they're kissing it all over. They take their babies and they rub the baby in the black stone. They take the baby away. All of this thinking it's going to carry some barakah away. Whereas, Umar radiallahu anhu, while making Hajj, he pointed to the black stone and talked to it. Actually, he was talking to the people, telling them, I was speaking to the black stone, saying, "I know you are only a stone. You cannot bring any good, nor can you prevent any evil. And the only reason why I'm kissing you is because Rasulullah ﷺ kissed you. That's it. We're doing as the Prophet ﷺ did. So if a person has this ornamental image of the door of the Kaaba, it's no big deal. Actually, it has no special religious significance. It was not there in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. Actually, it is a sign of extravagance, because that door, as we see it now, made out of gold, it's haram. It's haram. To make a gold door and put it on the Kaaba, it's haram. Better you make a wooden door and give that money to the poor and the needy. Now this thing of what they call zakhrafatil masajid, ornamentation of the mosques, this is against the sunnah. It's not really in the way of the Sahaba at all. The masjid, in fact, should be the epitome of simplicity. 4 walls, that's it. The rug on the floor, plain, not all kinds of designs and things. You're sitting there praying and all of a sudden you start to see things in their faces and astaghfirullah, this is not from the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He wore a thobe that had some lines in it and it distracted him in his prayer. He gave it away. But now the rug is all, you come into the masjid, most of the masjid is being built now, you see all this ornate work and pictures and carvings and marble and all of this. Actually, this is against the Sunnah. It is against the Sunnah. It is not that Islam doesn't like beauty, but extravagance, where people, the ornamentation of buildings, competition in the building of mosques. These are among the signs of the last days Prophet ﷺ spoke about. And the companions, they opposed this ornamentation of masjids. When in Omar's time they expanded the masjid, and Omar told them, keep the color plain, don't ornament it. This was the way of the Sahaba, simplicity. This is how the masjid should be, and it's among the things we have to go back to, where people have become so focused now on the external. We want this beautiful, and you come in the masjid, as I said, it's just distracting. You're supposed to come in and reflect on Allah. Instead you're looking at, what does that writing say? And it's things written in Arabic calligraphy, you can't read it from left to right. Arabs, this is their own language and they can't understand, what is that thing saying? What is the point of this? So really, this is among the trials of our times. If you tell people, don't put a mihrab in the masjid, it's not from the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Don't put a dome over the masjid, it's not from the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Don't put a star and a crescent, it is not a symbol of Islam. You tell people that, hey, the Turkish flag, the Pakistani flag, the Algerian flag, everybody's flag has got a star and crescent. You mean this is not Islam? No, it does not represent Islam. But in ignorance, Muslims have taken it as a symbol. So just as a Christian, if you were to throw a cross on the ground and stamp on this cross, that Christian would be up in arms against you. If a Christian takes a star and crescent and throws that on the ground and starts stomping on it, then Muslims will try to kill this person. But in fact, it has no meaning. It was not around in the time of the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba. People added it because we judge our months by the moon, so the crescent, and then the star, sometimes that crescent lines up sort of with the star, and they stuck it all together. But really, it's not from the Sunnah at all. Do you recommend that we avoid others, speakers like Harun Yahya? What about Hamza Yusuf or Yusuf Islam? Well, you take the good and what is useful, and beware of hidden agendas. This is all. Those people that I spoke about them with regards to their agendas. You need to know them. But if you have your foundation together, you know what Islam is, then some of the information which they've gathered which is useful, you can take it. Yusuf Islam is just a musician who became a Muslim, and he's concerned, he's not knowledgeable. People may have put him up and he's giving lectures and people are asking him questions and he might give some fatwas, but he's not in a position. Usually he tries to avoid it. He usually just talks about basic Islam, try to practice Islam and so and so. He's run into a little problem with the music thing, because he's kind of, fluctuating. He's kind of easing back into this thing, sort of. Whereas in the early stages he cut it loose completely. But inshallah, you do know that music, wind and stringed instruments are haram. So if he gives an opinion on that, you have to know that it's not correct. Leave it. Can you please answer the previous question on photography being shirk? How are we committing shirk if we're capturing an image of something that is already created and we're not creating anything ourselves? Well, if we make a photograph of an idol, it is like keeping the idol. So that photograph can be representative of shirk. But it doesn't mean every single photograph is representative of shirk. So it depends on what you have photographed, whether it will fall into the category of shirk or not. So just photographing things is not in and of itself shirk. The verse, don't come to prayers when you're in a state of intoxication until you know what you're saying. Is this verse applicable to intoxication as while I pray? In many ways I don't understand what I'm saying, not understanding Arabic. Well, no. The verse says, yeah, don't come to prayer in a state of intoxication until you know what you're saying. So the person is asking, well, hey, I don't know what I'm saying anyway. You know, I'm reciting this Arabic here and I don't really know what I'm saying, you know. So where does that put me, you know? Well, that puts you in a position where you need to learn Arabic. You know, that's the bottom line. It is incumbent on us to learn what we're saying, to understand the meaning of what we're saying. We need to, this is a part of the deviation that the Ummah, you know, has fallen into, where we're reading Quran for barakah and we don't know what the Quran is saying. So when Allah tells us to reflect on its meanings, أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ أَمْ عَلَى قُلُوبٍ أَقْفَالُهَا? Will they not reflect on the Quran, the meanings of the Quran, or are their hearts locked up? We're reading this verse and that's exactly what we're doing. We don't reflect on it and our hearts are locked up. You know? So the Quran is cursing us whilst we read it. We owe it to ourselves to learn what we're saying. Next, nothing takes place except as Allah wills. If everyone's fate is written up, not known to me, but can it be changed due to our future decisions? What is written in what is known as Ummul Kitab, Al-Lawh al-Mahfuz, there is no change. The first thing that Allah created was not the light of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is a lie which some people have propagated to try to elevate Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam beyond humanity. So they say the first thing, they have a fabricated hadith in which they say that the first thing Allah created was the light of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and He created it from Allah's light. And then from the light of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the rest of the world was created. The Shiites say the first thing that was created was the light of Ali and the light of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam from Allah's light, and then they have their story. Right? This is all falsehood, fabrications. The first thing that Allah created, Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, is a writing instrument, and Allah told it to write, and it asked Allah what should it write, and Allah said for it to write everything that was and would be. Everything that was and would be. That includes every decision that we make. Now, there is another writing. When the individual spirit is brought to the fetus, becomes a human being, the beginning of the 5th month, an angel comes and writes then how that person's life is going to be, whether it is a happy life or a wretched life, the provision they're going to have in the life, and etc., etc. This writing can change, and the Prophet ﷺ had said that nothing changes qadr except dua. You know, that one's dua can change the course of that writing of the angel, but not what is already recorded in the Lawh al-Mahfuz. This is basically to give us some kind of incentive we know we should turn to Allah in prayer, and that our prayer can change qadr in that respect. Technically speaking though, what we pray for, what we do, these are the decisions and the acts that we have a choice in, but the end results of this all is still known to Allah. If someone is getting psychological satisfaction due to, I guess it's supposed to be ta'weez, right? This is the amulets. Well, people get psychological satisfaction from all kinds of things. Haram things, many haram things. The guy gets psychological satisfaction from a bottle of alcohol, you know, physical and psychological. So what? You know, does this end justify the means? No. You know, Imam Khomeini brought the Iranian Revolution and made the West realize that the force in Islam. I do not see any sinister force or similar force in Sunni countries. Well, when the Mahdi comes, perhaps you will see it. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ did not perform Taraweeh in Jama'ah, but the Caliphs stated or started 8 to 20 or even more. No, the Caliphs didn't start 20. Prophet ﷺ did 11, and the authentic narrations from Omar is that he also confirmed that 11, just that he gathered people behind one Imam when they were praying separately in the time. The narrations which said he prayed 20, these are not authentic. Prophet Muhammad said, last question, Aga Khan is opening a hospital. What is this? It's opening something and hospitals in the world. So what? So are missionaries. You know, that doesn't change the fact that the Aga Khan religion, the Aga Khanis, the Ismailis, are deviant. They're out of Islam. They're not a part of Islam at all. Can a good deed be ruined after the fact? If you do something privately hoping for a reward from Allah, then someone announces that you did it, just some people find out about it, is your deed still safe regardless of how you react to this, as long as your intentions when you did it were pure? Basically, yes. You know, at the time that you did it, the act was done sincerely for the sake of Allah, you got that reward. And if later on you're affected by other factors, well then that may affect, if that thing had a continual reward, it may stop the reward at that point. He said we were created to dwell in paradise and that life is spent in worship so that we can get back there. Is it also a part of Islamic creed that Adam and Eve became aware of their nakedness only after they disobeyed Allah? Well, this is what it implies in the Quran, that after their disobedience they started to try to cover themselves. We have to take precautions when relating to the opposite sex in this life. Will this also be the case in paradise? No. Or will we return to a more perfect form where protection against ourselves, hijab, limiting interaction will not be necessary? That's correct. They won't be necessary. There is no marriage, having babies, you know, all the type of things that are connected with human relations in this world, it ends in this world. You know, we have whatever we desire in that world. We see many people who follow different schools of thoughts within our communities. Why is it that Muslims cannot respect the differences in these schools and see it as a mercy from Allah? Well, that's a whole big topic. Whether differences in the ummah are really a mercy from Allah. When Allah speaks about those who divide up the ummah and are happy with each of their different sects, He curses them. This is not a mercy. Division, that hadith which says ikhtilaf ummati rahmah, it is fabricated. The differences amongst my ummah is a mercy. This is a fabricated tradition. Difference is not mercy. This is a curse. Unity is mercy. That's what Allah calls to, is unity. وَاعْتَسِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا. Hold on firmly, all of you, to the rope of Allah, and do not become divided up. That is the commandment of Allah. Difference is a curse. I mean, that is, of course, difference where we split up into different sects. But difference of opinion, we will have difference of opinion. But when we let that difference now make us into one group, and we are opposed to everybody else, and we've become like an elitist club, where you are a card-carrying member, and everybody who's not a part of your club, is deviant, is astray, is heading for hell. Well, yes, Prophet ﷺ did give us the guidelines. Those who are not following the guidelines are all headed to hell. But it's not about my club and we're all going and everybody else is not going. How come you don't touch on the subject of the Muslim presence within this society? I thought we talked about that earlier, about the importance of hijrah, etc., etc. I don't know what the person means. I mean, there, of course, there's issues of da'wah which we have to do, and that's another lecture in and of itself. Should parents ask their children to leave their home if their iman is weak and negative influences on the younger children? Well, if the children cannot be controlled, if they're bringing corruption into the home and you can't control it for the preservation of the other children, then it may be you have to ask them to leave, because they are supposed to abide by the rules of the home. And if they're unwilling to abide by those rules, then they don't need to be there. Is the story of Omar's conversion fabricated? What about the story of the spider web protecting the Prophet ﷺ? Yes, these are not authentic. Story of Omar's conversion where, he came, he heard the sister reading Quran in the Khabbab, and he came in and beat up his sister and all. This is not authentic. It's not authentic. It's in all the books we're reading, I know. It's not authentic. Yeah, he converted to Islam, and there are other things like about he used to eat his idol when he got hungry. On one occasion he laughed and then he cried, and the other companions asked him, why were you doing that? He said, when I thought about this idol that I used to worship, which was made of dates, when I got hungry one day I ate it. I had to laugh, how silly I was, right? And then he said, when I was burying my child, my daughter, when I was burying her alive, and dust was on my beard, and she was brushing the dust off my beard as I put the dirt over her. When I thought back to that, I cried. The Prophet ﷺ said, pray 2 rak'ats on entering the mosque. What about when you enter a mosque at the time of Maghrib? Some imams say there is no prayer before Maghrib. The Prophet ﷺ said, between every adhan and iqamah, there are 2 rak'at. That's what he said. Between every adhan and iqamah, there should be time for you to make 2 rak'at if you wish. So it's perfectly legitimate. You say that after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, the hypocrites also rebelled against Islam. Are there descendants of these hypocrites still in Islam today? Well, the descendant, the son of Abdullah ibn Ubay ibn Salul, right, who was the leader of the hypocrites, right, his son, whose name was also Abdullah, was among the strongest believers in the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. So the fact that somebody may be a descendant of a hypocrite, it doesn't mean they're a hypocrite. Just as those people who claim to be descendants of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ don't mean that they're special in any way. You know, you have this caste system in India and Pakistan where people call themselves Sayyids, which means that, you know, they are up there. You know, Sayyids only marry Sayyids. You know, this is nonsense. It is, you know, when people go back and you trace, how do you know you're Sayyid? Let's trace your tree back to Prophet ﷺ. You can't trace it. This is just claims, empty claims. You know, and it is really, as I said, a leftover from the caste system. You know, as Hindus converted to Islam and they were in the Brahmin caste, you know, you had distinction between the Brahmins and the Sudras and so on. So they came into Islam. They needed something. They weren't. It wasn't enough that everybody was equal. No, we had to have Sayyids, right? So we have Sayyids. Most of the masjids in Virginia are tired. Do we still go there to pray? If so, what are the consequences on us? What do you mean they're tired? Is it tired? What is this? Lined. Okay, they have lines. No. Yeah. The point is that, as I said, though those lines which are put in the masjids, that this is bid'ah, right? And that if you are making a masjid, don't put it. It doesn't mean that praying in a masjid where there are lions is no longer valid. No, you go ahead and you pray. You know, I'm just saying it's a bid'ah. The mihrab in the masjid is a bid'ah. But can you find a masjid without a mihrab now? You know, can you find one without a mihrab? The dome. You know, these are things that were added and, you know, which have become standard symbols of the masjid today. But, you know, I'm just saying, if Allah blesses you to be in the position to build a masjid, then don't put a mihrab in, don't put a dome. You don't need a big old, you know, 30-foot minaret. No, you don't need these things. You just do a plain and simple building. You know, better you use that money to expand it, to increase its facilities, rather than, you know, sticking in these unnecessary appendages, you know, and then wasting your money on decorating them. This is just my advice. But if you come across time to pray, this is the masjid that's there, you pray. How can we get copies of your videotapes? Well, Brother Khalid Jan, you know, of the tapes that have been done recently, he is the contact person. You can get the copies through him. And there are other copies for the tape list which are not available to Khalid. If you have anybody going to the Emirates, then you can come to my office in Dar al-Fatah and we can make further copies for you. Please explain the position of Warithuddin Muhammad. Well, to be honest, I haven't been keeping up with Warithuddin Muhammad today. But the Warithuddin Muhammad which I knew of the past was a person who exploited the teachings of his father for his own benefit, who kept his people from knowing Islam in its purity, who became a barrier between true Islam and the Mislam that they had been following in the nation of Mislam, right? I don't know if he has finally let go and opened the door for people to find true Islam, but at the last stage that I read his material, you know, he was still into these esoteric interpretations. I mean, he did a book on Salah where he was talking about sub-skin intelligence and giving meanings to wiping every part of wudu. When you're doing this, you're doing that. He says this means this and that, and total nonsense. I know you don't like me saying this nonsense too much, but this really is nonsense. So he's a person whose knowledge of Islam is very limited, but being the son of Elijah Muhammad put him in a position of authority, and his followers thought he had knowledge, and they followed him, and he encouraged them to follow him blindly. Those of them that woke up left him. You know, people like Imam Siraj Wahaj, Abdul Rauf Shakir, you know, who were ministers and top figures in his organization. They left, found real Islam, and progressed to varying degrees. Abdul Rauf Shakir, he went to Medina, studied, graduated from the College of Hadith. He now works with the Awqaf of Qatar, alhamdulillah, you know. But in terms of Warithuddin Muhammad today, I would say if you are seeking knowledge, go elsewhere, you know. Yarhamukallah. If you are into nationalism, and I know I saw somebody showed me a video of one of his khutbahs where you know, the khutbah, people were clapping and carrying on in the khutbah like, hey, this didn't look like any khutbah of Jummah I've ever seen in my life, you know. It's definitely off. If he's still doing that, then this is error. I know he was quite proud about the fact that his daughter married a Christian. Yeah. You know, and he was into this thing about, you know, there's no difference between us and the Christian. They're not kafirs. He had a whole thing defending and arguing that Christians weren't kafirs. But Allah said, لَقَدْ كَفَرَ الَّذِينَ قَالُوا إِنَّ اللَّهَ ثَالِثُ ثَلَاثَةٍ. Those who say that Allah is the third of three are kafirs. But he was trying to argue that no, they're not kafirs. And he felt proud. My daughter, she married a Christian, and she would be there in the front lines, and he was proud about it. That's ignorance. So I say, if you are seeking knowledge of Islam, he is the wrong person to go to. And I don't think in the last few years that I haven't read up on his magazines and things that the change has been that great. Nobody has told me that there have been any sweeping changes. And if you go back to his early stuff, the stuff that he wrote after his father died, whoa, you have some serious kufr. I mean, kufr without any shadow of a doubt, claiming that he is the body Christ and all kinds of, you know, incredible things. And he never really repented from that stuff, you know. He just carried on. He said, okay, no, you don't need to read those books anymore. You know, we got some new stuff for you. But really, those old things needed to be burnt. They were filled with statements of open disbelief, denying that Prophet Isa would descend and come back. He said, no, Prophet Isa, that is us. Our organization is the body Christ. You got a whole story about the body Christ. Anyway, yes. I have heard that they pray 20 rak'at in the Prophet's mosque in Medina. Is this true? If so, where is the origin? Well, they sell cigarettes in Medina also. You know, they sell cigarettes in Medina. Meaning, don't judge Islam by what goes on in Medina. Judge Medina by what Islam says. That's the correct way. Same thing with Mecca. So 20 rak'ah is bid'ah. It's innovation. It is not from the sunnah. If you as an individual prayed 20 rak'ah sometime, someday, it's nafilah, so you can pray whatever number you want. But once you fix it, you lock in on 20, and this is what you're calling people to, and now you've got a bid'ah. Now you've got an innovation. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wassalatu wassalam ala Rasulil Kareem, wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ومن استنى بسنتي إلى يوم الدين. All praise is due to Allah, and may Allah's peace and blessings be on the last Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and on all those who follow the path of righteousness until the last day. We completed in the lectures yesterday, or the last set from the tafsir, we completed both the collection of the Quran as well as the division of the Quranic verses into Meccan and Medinan revelations and their significance. The significance, on one hand, to understanding the correct application of Islamic laws based on evidences found in the Quran, specifically with regards to laws that were revealed gradually. That this division, understanding the period of time of revelation, was critical for establishing the correct order in which we would understand these verses. And just to give an example from what I had said, because I gave you the example from the case of alcohol. We know with regards to visiting the graves, in the Meccan period, it was prohibited for all of the Sahaba to visit graves. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ in the Meccan period didn't visit the graves. Why? Because of the fact that they were just coming out of paganism, idolatry, and much of idolatry is focused on grave worship. Grave worship is a major focal point. If you look at, the worship, for example, of the Chinese, it is focused on ancestral worship, worshiping the ancestors, the dead, going to the grave. So that the issue of visiting the graves was cancelled completely in the early stage. Then later on, Prophet ﷺ said, Kuntu nahaytukum an ziyaratil qubur. I used to forbid you from visiting the graves. Fazuruha. But now, go ahead and visit them, because they are better to remind you of the hereafter. Right? So after their tawheed, their understanding of the aqidah of Islam was firm, then the visiting of the graves was made permissible to them. So we have an example here of a situation where there was a total prohibition and then a relaxation. So in the same way, you have people who have tried to claim that the verse in the Quran, in Surah Al-Ma'idah, wherein Allah says, indeed alcohol, gambling, sacrificial altars, and divination are a result of Satan's work, so stay away from them, that this was the early prohibition. And then later it was relaxed, as I mentioned. I just gave you an example from a real situation where it actually occurred. So the way by which we know that this was not the first command but it was the last command is from understanding the periods of time in which the revelations came. Right? So I'm just reiterating that point. And we said also that from the division of the Quranic verses into Meccan and Medinan, we also learn something of the methodology of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ in giving da'wah. In the Meccan period, Allah tells the Prophet ﷺ not to curse the idols of the disbelievers, lest they would curse Allah. So this is informing us when we're giving da'wah to people who may be involved in idolatry, no matter how silly or ridiculous their idolatry may be, to curse what they're doing, to ridicule it, is not correct. It's not correct. And this is why those that were involved in some of the Christian-Muslim dialogues, where they go into that kind of an approach, it's actually not in keeping with the Sunnah. Right? Instead, of course, one points out the error, but does it without ridicule. Because the idea is not battle, the idea is educating, conveying the truth. Anyway, we also have, from the division of the surahs and the verses, a means by which the framework, the basic framework of the Prophet ﷺ's biography can be deduced. This is a primary source for incidents from the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ's life. Anyway, today we're going on to the methodology of tafsir. Tafsir being the explanation or clarification, as we said earlier, of the meanings of the verses of the Quran. Allah did say, "Inna nahnu nazzalna dhikra wa inna lahu lahafidhun." Indeed, I have revealed the reminder, and indeed I will preserve it. That the preservation of the Quran was not only the physical preservation about which we spoke in the collection of the Quranic text, but also the preservation of the meanings, because that is as critical as the text. Because if you listen to Christian preachers today, for example, you will find 10 different preachers. They will take the same verse from the Bible, and each one has his own story, his own interpretation, and he runs with it. Right? So not only do they have a distorted text, they have no means of establishing what was intended by that text. Right? So when we talk about preservation of the text, of course the earlier prophets, this was necessary because the prophets alayhimussalam were there with their revelation. They gave that clarification. Right? And after them, other prophets were sent. So that was a continual process. Whereas in the case of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, there were no prophets coming after him. So the meanings of what the Quran contained had to be preserved, so that human beings until the last day would have access not only to the text, but to what was intended by the text. And I gave you an example before of the Qadiani explanation of the seal of the prophethood. I also gave you an example before of the Shia explanation of what the two seas were, and the pearl and the coral. You see, what stops them and other groups from twisting the meanings of the Quran either through linguistic interpretations or what they call esoteric interpretations, meaning interpretations based on hidden knowledge? What stops them? That's what we're going to look at. The correct methodology of interpretation of the Quran, which has been deduced from the methodology of that early generation, because this is where it came from. It wasn't somebody in our times that sat down and made up a way. No. The scholars, and the one in particular whose system we're following, Ibn Kathir, analyzed the way by which the companions of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and their students and their students, how they understood, how they interpreted the Quran, and extracted from their methodology a general methodology to be followed to ensure that the Quran is interpreted or understood correctly. And that's what we're going to look at now. The steps by which the Quran may be interpreted. And what you will find consistently is that those people who have deviated, they consistently do not follow these methods. And that's why it is no surprise that they've gone astray. I mean, either it is out of ignorance, they don't have knowledge, they haven't sought that knowledge, they didn't care to find that knowledge, or it is out of arrogance and pride where they feel, that they are in that position to make these kind of pronouncements and interpretations. Or their intention is to deviate, their intention is to distort. It's a deliberate attempt. In the end, of course, Allah knows what are in people's hearts, but the bottom line is that those who do not follow this methodology which was identified by Muslim scholars, you're talking about over 500 years ago. This is not a scholar of our time. Not a scholar of our time here who is saying this. No, it's over 500 years ago. People like Ibn Kathir and the scholars of Tafsir, they identified these steps. Those who don't follow them have deviated, will deviate. Though sometimes they may be accurate, they may hit on a point and in fact it is correct. Most times they won't. That's the reality. Now, the question. Allah revealed the Quran in Arabic. Right? The English quote-unquote Quran is not the Quran. The Quran is the Arabic text. That's what was revealed. That is what Angel Gabriel recited to Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. That is what was taken from the Lawh al-Mahfuz, which was sent down by Allah from the Lawh al-Mahfuz to the first heaven. From there, Angel Gabriel took it and recited it to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and he recited it to his companions. That is the Quran, the Arabic, not the English translation. English translation is a translation of some of the meanings as understood by that translator. He had a choice of words he could use in English. We see this Arabic word has this meaning, that meaning, that meaning, that meaning, and he chose one or two. Sometimes these one or two do convey the general meaning, sometimes they don't. So the English interpretation, we should not be fooled into thinking that that is the Quran. It is not. That should be very clear in our minds. And those who seek to make interpretation from the English, and that's all they have, they will deviate. If they do not rely on those people of knowledge who have access to the correct interpretation of these verses, if they're just going by the translation alone, they will deviate. Because English has so many other implications. So though this word may be translated in Arabic as this other word in English, that word in English may have other implications not found in the Arabic word. And somebody taking those other implications can create something else altogether. Just as a simple example before we go in of this, what I'm trying to just get it across to you. When I had accepted Islam and I studied in Medina, I went home around 1980. I went back down to visit Jamaica. I told you before, I visited when I first accepted Islam. I went down to Jamaica looking for Muslims. I mentioned that before. Then I went, after a year after I accepted Islam, I went to Medina to study. And by 1980, when I graduated, I went back down to Jamaica and a number of other islands and of West Indies and Central America, South America, on dawah purposes, trying to meet the communities, educate, etc. Anyway, when I went back down to Jamaica, I came across, because by then Islam had started to spread, I came across a group of Muslims there who had converted to Islam from Rastafarianism. You know, they were former Rastafarians. This Bob Marley, the dreadlocks, this kind of thing, right? They converted over to Islam. Alhamdulillah. But they were still smoking weed. Yeah. Because Rastafarian tradition, they believe that marijuana is a holy herb which they use in their rituals of worship. Before they worship God, they smoke up, get high, and then they worship God. Okay? This is their methodology. Okay? So they came into Islam and they didn't want to let go of the weed, they brought it in with them, right? So, you know, I sat down with a group of these brothers and I started to explain to them that this thing is haram. It's forbidden. They said, no, it's not haram. You know, Allah says in the Quran, you know, intoxicant. No, it doesn't intoxicate us. You know, of course, these guys have been smoking such quantities, you know. You could say, yeah, they can smoke and they seem to be perfectly okay, you know. So, still I'm trying to, they said, no, it's in the Quran. I said, I don't think so. I said, yes. And they pulled out a Yusuf Ali translation of the Quran. And they went to the section where Moses, you know, he is with his people in the wilderness. And Allah is sending down the manna and salwa, the quails and the manna, the bread. And the people wanted to go into the city. And they wanted to eat of some other things. They were tired of, you know, what Allah had been sending down for them. They want to eat some other things. They want to eat some onions and the other things, right? It's mentioned there. And there's listed the different things. If somebody has the Yusuf Ali translation of the Quran here? Nobody has it? Oh, anyway. You can go back and check this point anyway afterwards. But in the list of things which are identified that they wanted to eat, and the Prophet Moses says to them, do you desire what is lesser or less over that which is better? You know, trying to show them, hey, this other stuff you want, what Allah has given you is better. But if that's what you want, you know, anyway, okay, go ahead. I mean, the okay was there. And it mentions there qithaiha wa adasiha wa fumiha, this listing, right? And then you go in and you see Yusuf Ali's translation. He says, he describes one of those terms, I don't remember exactly which one it was, but he translates it as pot herbs. There it is, pot. Everybody knows marijuana is pot, and herb, and they call it the herb. So there it is right there in the Quran. Prophet Moses said that they could go and take these pot herbs. Yeah. Of course, what Yusuf Ali was trying to say was these herbs, you know, which, you know, are the term herb, H-E-R-B, pronounced herb, you don't pronounce the H, right? This is used to refer to a number of different vegetable-like plants, right? This is one of the terms used. And the fact that it was pot herbs, meaning that they would cook it, because some of these herbs you don't cook, you know, you use it for tea or other things, and some of it that you cook with. So he was referring to the ones that you put in pots and you cook. So he called it pot herbs. Little did he know, of course he did this way back in 1930, little did he know that the term pot would come to refer in slang to marijuana, and in Jamaican slang, herb meant also marijuana. So he had like a double whammy here on the Quran. You know, it's not just a statement, but he emphasized the statement. You know. So this is why I just give as an example how, you know, translation may have other implications, though initially, yes, the term in Arabic could be described that way in English. What you end up with in English can have other implications which are not there in the Arabic at all. Right? So we have to be very careful of that. Now, the question, if the Quran was revealed in Arabic, in the language which the Sahaba, the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, spoke, why should there be any need for interpretation? I mean, if English is our native language, we get a book which is written in English, we can understand the book. I mean, unless it's in some field, you know, of astrophysics or whatever. Okay, we didn't study that, this is like Greek. But if it is just instructions and what you need to do in your daily life, do this, don't do that, so and so, you know, history, some little bit of history, things like that. You don't need anybody to interpret this for you. So then, why would there be a need in the Arabic for tafsir if it was in the language of the companions? The point is that if Allah had willed, if He wished, He could have made the Quranic text absolutely clear, having no need for any interpretation. Allah could have done that. However, Allah deliberately put certain terms, certain phrases in the Quran which obliged the companions of the Prophet Muhammad to go to him to get clarity. He did it to train them. This is deliberate, because He, in doing that, set in motion a methodology which would evolve and others would follow. This is deliberate. So the methodology which came out of the way by which Prophet ﷺ explained the Quran and the companions understood it and explained it, the methodology has basically 5 levels or 5 steps to tafsir. These steps, it's important for you to understand. This is the core, the key, the essence of this particular topic, the 5 steps of tafsir. The first is the explanation of the Quran in its context, and we spoke about that earlier when we spoke about the verse where Allah said He's closer to you than your jugular vein. The correct understanding is found by reading the context. We also talked about لا يمسه إلا المطهرون, none can touch it except for the pure. The correct interpretation of that verse again is within the context in which that verse was revealed. If you take it out of the context, yes, that verse seems to imply that women or men who are not in a state of purity, they cannot touch the Quran. It's not allowed if you take that verse out by itself. But once you read the verse in the context of the verse itself, the context of the whole verse, don't take just a piece, then it becomes clear that the Quran being talked about is the Quran in the heavens. Those who are touching it is talked about are the angels. That only the angels can touch that Quran, can handle that Quran. It's clear. And all of the major scholars confirm that. In fact, our brother, who was not aware that this was the correct interpretation and had been telling his own family, don't touch the Quran, he went and checked and got, because I mentioned before you can check Tafsir Tabari, Tafsir Ibn Kathir. He has the Arabic text of the Tafsir of Ibn Kathir and the Tabari explaining it. Anybody who understands Arabic can get it from him and read it for themselves. But anyway, the point is that this was understood. Understood from the context, very clear, by the early scholars. And it's latter-day scholars or ignorant followers of scholars who have used this verse incorrectly, promoting this idea that it's not permissible for one to touch the Quran unless one is in a state of wudu. So the first step in understanding the Quran is to look at the verses of the Quran in context. And this, of course, is common sense, isn't it? Because even in our own communications, if somebody takes a statement out of context of what you're speaking about, they can twist your words. They can make you say things you weren't saying. So, of course, taking statements within the context in which they're said is very important for understanding, correct understanding of these statements. The Quran is no different in this regard. Now, that explanation may be within, or the context may be within a verse. That means that the statement we're looking at is a piece of a verse. We need to read the whole verse. It may be in a verse following it, or it may be later on in that chapter, or it may be in another chapter elsewhere in the Quran. So when we talk about understanding that verse in the context of the Quran, it doesn't necessarily mean in the sequence of just those verses there, but in the context of the Quran as a whole. Right? So this is the first step. An example we have of the explanation, for example, where Allah says, this is one of the chapters of the Meccan period, وَالسَّمَاءِ وَالطَّارِقِ, by the sky and the knocker. Tariq means the knocker, that which knocks. Mitraqa is a hammer. Then Allah goes on to say and ask, وَمَا أَدْرَاكَ مَا الطَّارِقِ, and what will explain to you what that knocker is. And Allah goes on in the third verse to say, النجم الثاقب, the piercing star. Allah clarifies this there. This is, as I said, a basic, it's a beginning point, it's a standard first step. But that first step, one cannot stop there. One cannot stop there. Meaning that, okay, we've got clarity here, but because Allah also stated, وَأَنزَلْنَا إِلَيْكَ الذِّكْرَ, I've revealed to you, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the reminder being one of the titles of the Quran. وَأَنزَلْنَا إِلَيْكَ الذِّكْرَ لِتُبَيِّنَ لِلنَّاسِ مَا نُزِّلَ إِلَيْهِمْ, in order that you would explain to people what was revealed for them. So Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam had the role of explaining the Quran to his companions and to the generations to come. Therefore, if we are to understand the Quran, after having taken the first step, that is going and looking at these verses in context, we must then look to see what did Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam say on this. We must. What he said, speaking about the Quran and its meanings, is from revelation. It is a part of the revelation. As Allah said in the Quran, وَمَا يَنْتِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ يُوحَىٰ. He did not speak from his own desires. What he said was revelation which was revealed to him. So from the Islamic context, we have two sources of revelation. The Quran is the direct words of Allah. Direct revelation, the exact words of Allah. The Hadith Qudsi, where Prophet Muhammad ﷺ quotes Allah as saying, these are the indirect words of Allah. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is quoting Allah, but not the direct words. There is paraphrasing. And the Hadith represent the words of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ inspired by revelation from Allah. So these are the three levels of revelation that we have. And to understand the difference between the three, one could say that if I said the Quran was revealed in Arabic, that's my exact statement. Somebody who said to somebody else, you know, I was listening to the lecture of Brother Bilal, and he said the Quran was revealed in Arabic. He's repeated my exact words. Okay? That's like the Quran. If he said to him, you know, whilst I was listening to the lecture, I heard him say about the Quran that it was an Arabic Quran. It's not my exact words, but it's conveying the meaning of what I said. And the third case where he said, you know, after listening to this lecture, I came to realize that the true Quran is the Arabic Quran. You see? Now, he has gotten this idea from what I said, and he has put it totally in his own words. It's not what I didn't say anything about true or anything like this, but what he's saying is correct. It is based, the concept is there, but he's brought it out completely in his own words. These are like the three different levels. So when we find, for example, the verse where Allah says, لا تدركه الأبصار وهو يدرك الأبصار, eyes do not encompass him, and he encompasses all sight. This implies, or this states basically, that human beings will not be able to see Allah. It's the verse. Now, there is another verse in the Quran. Some people have taken that and just gone with it. Human beings will never be able to see Allah. Never. Not in this life or the next life. Ever. Because this first verse that I just expressed here doesn't talk about whether it's this life or the next life. It just states eyes or sight will not encompass him, but he will encompass all. He encompasses all sight. Now there's another verse in the Quran. That was from Surah Al-An'am, which is the 6th chapter. If you go all the way to the 75th chapter, Surah Al-Qiyamah, verse 23, we find Allah describing the people in paradise as being ila rabbiha nadhira, gazing at their Lord. Nadhira. Those people who took the position that Allah cannot be seen in this life or the next life, they were then obliged to go to the Arabic term nadhira and to interpret it in another way. Because the verb nadhara, you have another, which means to see or to look at. You have intadhara, which comes from that same root, which means to wait. So they say they will be waiting for their Lord. So they've to cut that because they've already denied the possibility. But if we just take it on the surface meaning, those scholars who took it on that surface meaning, they're saying, they're putting these two verses together, where Allah says, eyes cannot see Him. But He says, in paradise, they will be gazing at their Lord. They're saying, well, that first verse meant no eyes in this life can see Him. As confirmed in the case of Prophet Ibrahim, who wanted to see Allah, and Allah said, if you can deal with His glory being revealed on the mountain, if the mountain can handle it, then you'll be able to see your Lord. And of course, he couldn't see Him. Right? So they say, it's in this life. With our eyes as they are, we cannot see Allah. But in the next life, those who make it to paradise, they will be not as we are in this life. We are physical. Of course, we're not, as in Christian theology, in paradise people are spiritual beings. Right? And actually Yusuf Ali got caught up in this too, and he goes in to try to agree with this idea and promote this idea, that in paradise we're just spiritual beings. So there's no sexual relations in paradise. No, it doesn't fit. You see, this is the idea of the Christian kind of idea. No. This in paradise is just a spiritual thing. It doesn't get into any physical pleasures. It's just all spiritual. Right? But of course, there's so many verses in the Quran which imply the physical. So he had to go in then, and Yusuf Ali actually has done a job on that translation and reinterpreting these things, right? So actually his translation is really not very reliable at all, because he was influenced by these, in the 30s of course, by Western approaches to religion and theology, and he expresses a good bit of that in his translation. Anyway, the point is that those who argue that they will be able to see Allah in the next life, it's based on the fact that we are not the same as we were in this life. So Allah recreates us in a new or in a different state, which would then be able to see Allah. Right? That was the explanation. Now, of course, one could say, well, which one's right? Is it really that we can't see Allah in both this life and the next? We should just go with that first general understanding, and the second one really means they're waiting for their Lord? Well, when you go to the hadith, you can find clearly in Sahih Bukhari, Prophet ﷺ said, in paradise you will see your Lord the way you see the full moon, without any of you having to crane your necks to try to see Him. You will see your Lord the way you see the full moon in the night of the full moon. Hey, finish. That has clarified the Sunnah here now. Remove that other interpretation which was trying to run away from this thing, and clarifies, yes, we will see Allah. Of course, the issue of seeing Allah in that life still doesn't necessarily mean that we encompass Allah with our sight, because we may see things without being able to encompass them. Even in this life we see things, but we can't necessarily encompass it. I mean, you can stand outside the building and you can see this school building, but can you encompass it? Meaning, when you stand here you can see all around it? No, you're not able to. That nothing of it escapes your sight? No, can't do that. The limitations in this life are quite drastic. In the next life, though we will have greater power of sight, etc., which will allow us to see Allah, still encompassing Allah, no, because Allah is still the infinite. We are still finite beings, and the finite cannot encompass the infinite. But understanding or grasping or seeing to a limited degree, possible, if Allah gives the finite, that power. Right? So this is the correct understanding. And of course, when Prophet Muhammad ﷺ went on the ascension, the Mi'raj, some of his companions asked him whether he saw Allah or not. Because some people have the belief that when he went on Mi'raj, he saw Allah. But he said very clearly to Abu Dhar, who asked him that question, "No, I did not see Allah. How could I see him? I only saw light. His veil was light. His veil was light. He didn't see Allah." So, as I said, the hadith or the explanations of the Prophet ﷺ, when brought together, all that the Prophet ﷺ said about seeing Allah, when brought together, now this gives us the correct interpretation and understanding. Because in Surah An-Najm, there are verses there which, if one did not understand the context, where Allah there says that he saw him again. It doesn't say who him is. And this is where people got the idea that maybe he saw Allah. But he clarified, "No, I didn't see him. What I saw was only light." Furthermore, when Aisha asked him about who was the him that he was talking about here, he said it was Jibreel. That he only saw Jibreel on 2 occasions in his natural form. When he first received the revelation and he came out of the cave, Jibreel was there before him in his natural form, and he said he filled the whole horizon. Wherever he looked, he saw Jibreel. Not that he was running around everywhere he looked, but he filled, having over 600 wings, he filled the whole horizon. And he saw him again by the lote tree of the boundary on the Mi'raj. He saw him at that time also in his natural state. So the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ clarifies for us this issue of seeing Allah. That he did not see Allah in this life, that no one can see Allah in this life, that people would see Allah in paradise. His hadith clarifies and ends the argument. Also, when we spoke before about Allah being beyond His creation, the end of all the arguments is the hadith. You know, those people who say, if you ask the question, where is Allah? They say, no, you shouldn't ask that question. It's not allowed for you to ask it. We say, Rasulullah ﷺ asked it. He taught it. So that is the end of the argument. If there was no hadith, then of course you could have an opinion, I could have an opinion. What did this actually mean? And what did, we could be back and forth. But the hadith clarify for us, when the Prophet ﷺ asked the girl in Sahih Muslim, where is Allah? And she said, above the heavens. Then we know that is the right answer, because he said, free her because she is a true believer based on her statement. So it means that is the answer. That's what we need to teach our children. And for anybody who says Allah is everywhere, they are off. They are misguided. They are misinformed. That is incorrect. The hadith is what gives us that clarity. So the use of the sunnah is absolutely required. A person who does not have a comprehensive understanding of the sunnah does not have the authority or the right to speak about the meanings of the Quran. They don't have that right. To do so is to speak in ignorance and to misguide people. Of course, there are some things of the Quran which are obvious. Allah is one. Qul huwa Allahu ahad. It's not saying you cannot go and tell people Allah is one and unique. No. Some things are very obvious. This is not interpretation. You're just narrating information. Yes, you can take from the Quran that information and pass it on to others. But now when you come to the point of interpretation, somebody asks you, well, what does this mean? Now, if you don't have comprehensive knowledge of the Sunnah, for you to just go and give your opinion about what this verse means, then you have entered into a forbidden zone. You fall into misguidance and you will misguide others. This is the point here. Critical point. The Sahaba went to Prophet Muhammad ﷺ when Allah revealed the verse in the Quran where he said that the believers are those who do not cloak their iman, their faith, with dhulm. One verse Allah says the believers are those who don't cloak their faith with dhulm. Now the term dhulm in Arabic can be translated as sin, oppression, wrongdoing. When they heard that verse recited by the Prophet ﷺ, it struck them, it bothered them, because as they said, who amongst us has not committed some form of dhulm? So basically this verse implies that we're not believers. So they came back to Rasulullah ﷺ and asked him, let us know, what does this mean, O Messenger of Allah? What does this mean? Does it mean we are disbelievers? Because there is none amongst us who have not committed some form of dhulm. So he said, it is not as you think. Have you not read the advice of Luqman to his son, wherein he said, Inna shirka la dhulmun azim. Indeed, shirk is the great dhulm, the great wrong. That is what Allah is referring to. So Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he gave them that clarity, that the true believers do not cloak their iman, their faith, with shirk. That is the point. But without that explanation, the Sahaba were lost. So if the Sahaba were required to go to Rasulullah ﷺ for clarity, what about us? Especially those of us who don't know Arabic, and you're reading the Quran in English translation, to then take up this English translation of the Quran, and we're going to now make pronouncements and interpret and to explain. This is dhulm. This is oppression. This is oppression of those who are listening to you, who are believing in you, who are trusting in you. This is oppression of them. The Quran and the Sunnah cannot be separated. They are inseparable. That's why our declaration of faith was not just La ilaha illallah. It's La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. That is the Quran and the Sunnah. It's Allah and His Messenger. Inseparable. It is a pillar of faith. Now, the second or the third level, second step, was understanding the Quran by the Sunnah. And I should just mention, among these is the verse in which Allah speaks of, for example, Al-Kawthar. All of us know, Inna a'tainaka al-Kawthar. Alhamdulillah. Yahdikumullah wa yuslih ba'alakum. This has been translated Al-Kawthar from Kathir. It means abundance. So some people have translated it, indeed I, Allah, have given you, Muhammad, abundance. That's the general meaning. However, Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he explained that Al-Kawthar is a river in paradise. It is a river in paradise. So therefore, the correct translation is not abundance, but we have given you a river in paradise by the name of Kawthar. That hadith clarifies what is intended here. The third level is understanding the Quran by the athar, or the explanations of the Sahaba. That's the third level. So to understand the Quran according to the explanations of the Sahaba. What does this mean? It means that the Quran was revealed to Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. He conveyed it, he explained it. When he conveyed and explained it, the companions applied it, and he confirmed their application or corrected their misapplication. They understood the context in which the verses were revealed and explained, and how they were intended to be applied. They provide for us what they call asbabun nuzul. This is actually one of the topics that are looked at in the science of tafsir. Asbabun nuzul, or the reasons for the revelations. That, as I explained to you before, the verses of the Quran, many of them were revealed in contexts. Particular incidents took place in the Prophet ﷺ's life, and verses came to respond to these circumstances. By understanding the circumstances in which led to the revelation of these verses, this gives us a better understanding of how to apply these verses. Now, it is not limited to those circumstances, but it gives us an approach as to how to apply it. So the circumstances in which the hadiths were revealed, the verses of the Quran were revealed and explained by the Prophet ﷺ, this becomes critical for us to understand how to interpret or to clarify the meanings of the Quran. For example, we have the verse in Surah An-Nur, verse 31, where Allah says, "And tell the believing women to lower their gaze, and to guard their chastity, and to only reveal from their adornment that which normally appears." What is meant by this? That which normally appears. When we go to the explanation of Ibn Abbas, when he was asked about this verse, what does that mean? He said it meant the face and hands. He, Ibn Abbas, clarified that it meant the face and hands. That this is what is permissible when a woman covers herself to reveal. He didn't include the feet. He said the face and hands. Salama, when she was asked whether a woman can make salah in a scarf and a robe-like garment, a thobe, or qamis, she said yes, she can do so as long as that robe-like garment, her dress, is wide, loose, and it covers the tops of her feet. That the garment that the woman wears for prayer, as well as when she is outside of her home, in front of people who are from her, not from her maharim, that garment should, under normal circumstances, cover the tops of her feet. Now, some people, not following this, wearing garments which may go up to their ankles only, because that is the Western norm today. The idea of your garment coming down and touching the floor, and no. Or we wear it to the waist, and we wear leg stockings from the waist down. Nobody is going to argue that that is permissible. We all recognize it is not permissible, because of the fact that the garment shows the shape of the aura, and that's what socks do. It is not a requirement to wear socks. What is a requirement is that that outer garment, or the garment you're going to wear in prayer, should come down and cover the tops of your feet, as a norm. Of course, when you go into sujood and so on, so maybe your heel will, the bottom of your foot will be exposed. That's not a problem, because that has just happened by itself out of your control. What's required is not to say you have to wear a garment which is so long that even when you make sujood it should still be hanging on the ground. No, because of course you can't walk, you'll be tripping over your garment the whole time, right? But what is requirement is that it comes down when you stand normally. It comes down and it covers the tops of your feet. That is the basic dress requirement. And as we as Muslim men would insist that our wives follow these instructions, we should also know that in the same way, women are not allowed to wear leotards and claim that they're covering themselves. We are not allowed to wear pants which, when we sit down, when we make ruku', when we make sujood, these garments hug and expose our private parts. It's the same way we're not allowed to do it. And one of the conditions for salah, for its validity, is covering the aura. So we don't want to have a double standard. You see, this is a very sad situation, which the West, when they look at Muslim men, they have the women covered from head to toe, and the guy is walking around in shorts, and he's looking like everybody else. He's blending in. This is the double standard. When I went to Malaysia just recently, because it's during the summer, a lot of Saudis were more religious. They go to Malaysia for holidays because it's a Muslim country as opposed to going to Europe. A number of them have gone there. But the wives are covering with niqab and everything, and the guys are there wearing shorts. The shirts tucked in, of course, when they sit, when they bend, everything, aura is exposed. It has become a norm. But in fact, it is a major error. It has to do with identity. Because when you ask brothers, well, brother, why can't you wear a top which comes down? Okay, you want to wear pants, no problem, but wear a top which comes down to your knee, that covers that area, so that when you bend, when you sit, when you do whatever you do, your aura is not exposed. It's not fashionable. It's old country, the home country, backwards, the old days. No. These garments, which the forefathers in places like India, Pakistan, in Nigeria, these places, they developed these garments because they were already wearing some kind of pant-like thing. So what they did was they modified their garments so that they would fulfill the requirements of covering. And that is what is on us. Unfortunately, many of us have embraced Western culture, and this is something which is a product of colonialism, where people who worked in the colonial administration or wanted to get jobs in the colonial administration, they realized that you could only advance, you could only get a job if you looked like your colonial master. The more you look like him, the more he brought you up. So the men started dressing like Western people. And furthermore, when they were invited to gatherings, with the colonial administrator, family was there and everything, he now was telling his wife, well, because the colonial administrator, his wife, her hair is all out and everything else. So he tells his wife, well, maybe take it down so you look like them. So you've got the tradition now in Pakistan, of what you call this thing, dupatta, right? Which is a symbol of a scarf worn across the shoulders, which may be put on the head. Sometimes it's so small you can't put it on the head. If you put it on the head, it's see-through anyway. You may as well not have anything on your head. And that has become the tradition in that area. So we need to look seriously, at these cultural deviations which have taken place in the Ummah, and we need to correct these things. Of course some people say, well, hey, this is a small thing. We have Muslims dying in Chechnya, dying in Kashmir, and you're talking about covering, you're wearing a long shirt to cover your aura. Hey, the reality, as I always say to brothers who raise this point, if you are unable to cover your aura for your salah, and when you leave your home, you will not be able to go and make jihad for the sake of Allah. You will not. Yeah, you'll take a trip over there. You had people when the Afghan war was on, people went there. So it could be said, I went to Afghanistan. This was like a badge. You could wear it as I was in Afghanistan. But what did you do in Afghanistan? You went there, you weren't trained, you didn't have any, the Mujahideen, they were living in the mountains, in the snow, they had to carry you up the mountains and carry you down the mountains. You couldn't. In fact, you were a hindrance to them. You almost got some of them killed. But you came back, you held a Kalashnikov whilst you were there, you came back, I was in Afghanistan. This is the point. Those people, this is what they're talking about, It's jihad. And they can't deal with this jihadun nafs. Because that's what it's about, isn't it? Jihadun nafs. If the person cannot make the jihad of the self to obey the instructions of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then they're not going to be able to make the jihad for the sake of Allah. That's reality. So the Sahaba, they gave that clarification for us. They are the ones who gave us, as I said, the circumstances in which the verses were revealed. We need to depend on their understanding for the clarity of the Quranic text. We need to depend on their understanding. Now, there are some of the companions who were former Jews who accepted Islam, and they also narrated what was in Jewish texts which seemed to be related to some of the verses or some of the concepts there in the Quran. These narrations came to be known as Israeliyat. Israeliyat, or the Israelite narrations. It is generally accepted amongst the scholars of tafsir that these cannot be relied upon for clarification of Quranic texts. They may be relied upon for further confirmation of Quranic texts, which is a different thing. Meaning the Quran said this, Prophet ﷺ explained it that way, and we said, yeah, look, also in their narrations, this confirms what the Prophet ﷺ also said. So it's a secondary use. But not that we're going to take a verse from the Quran, then we bring an Israeliyat and say, that's what it means because it's what it said there in the writings of the Jewish rabbis, etc. No, we cannot do that. Not acceptable. So these, although these were conveyed by the Sahaba, they were just conveying information which was out there. And Prophet ﷺ did say in the hadith which is sahih, in Sahih al-Bukhari, Hadithu an Bani Israel wala haraj. You can talk about the Israelites, what they say in their books, and there is no sin. You can talk about it. Now, talking about it is one thing. You know, it's like stories. You can hear stories. But using it as a means of seeking knowledge is another thing. That's why when Prophet Muhammad ﷺ saw Umar radiallahu anhu reading the Torah, yarhamkallah, reading the Torah, he became angry with him. And Umar couldn't really understand why, you know. And Prophet ﷺ said that if Prophet Musa came, he would follow what I have. Right? What is there in the Torah is not an authority. It is not a source of knowledge. It may be confirmational knowledge if it has been verified by the Quran or by the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, but not as an independent source for clarification. No. And it is wrong. And you find the tradition of some of those who have deviated in the explanation of the Quran, that they will go into the English Quran and then they will bring things from the Bible and all these sources and use that to explain the Quran. This is deviation. This is wrong. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ opposed it tooth and nail. This is error. The fourth level of interpretation is that of tafsir of the Quran by the language. Tafsir of Quran by the language, by the Arabic language. The Arabic language as it was revealed. Important point. Not just by the Arabic language in general, because languages evolve. In the past, in ancient Arabic, ta'ira meant bird. And it was also used to refer to anything which flew. Today, ta'ira is used to refer to an airplane. So now if you use the modern understanding of ta'ira and go back into the Quran, you know, you could create havoc. You literally could create havoc with the meanings of the Quran. The Arabic language, for those things which have not been explained by the Quran in context, not been explained by the Sunnah, not been explained by the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, we then go to the Fusha or classical Arabic. There are dictionaries of classical Arabic. The main one is called Lisanul Arab, or the tongue of the Arabs. It's like 20-something volumes. From that, we now can extract the correct meanings based on the Arabic as it was understood at that time. An example where not following that procedure can lead to serious deviation is a circumstance which I came across when I was giving a lecture in New York City in I think it was Mashallah Taqwa there in Brooklyn, and I was giving a lecture. It was on Tawheed, and I was talking about fortune telling, and after explaining about fortune telling I went into astrology, and I explained that astrology was a form of fortune telling and it is forbidden in Islam, haram. A brother jumped up in the back of the group. He said, no, it's not. He was a Muslim astrologer, right? He jumped up. He had been writing charts for everybody else, you know, Virgo and Pisces, and he was making out the charts. He jumped up and said, no, it is permissible. I said, no, it is forbidden. Prophet Muhammad said, Allah said so in the Quran. I said, I really don't think so. He said, yes. Surah Al-Buruj. He whipped out his Yusuf Ali translation. Here we are with Yusuf Ali again. And he read Yusuf Ali's translation of Buruj, which was the zodiacal signs. The signs of the zodiac. So he has Allah swearing, وَالسَّمَاءِ ذَاتِ الْبُرُوجِ, by the sign, by the sky and the zodiacal signs. Whoa. Yeah, so there it is. This was his evidence to justify fortune telling. The reality is that yes, modern Arabic Buruj has come to refer to the zodiacal signs. This is true. However, in classical Arabic, the Buruj refers to the constellations, the combination of the stars in the sky as they are, not those images which were superimposed over these constellations by the Babylonians and the Greeks and the Egyptians, which formed the basis of astrology. No, it just meant the constellations. This is critical, and this is why, as I said, going to that English interpretation of the meanings can be dangerous if a person hasn't found himself or herself a reliable translation. The most reliable translation around today, in spite of its cumbersomeness and clumsiness of reading, is the Noble Quran. The Noble Quran by Muhsin Khan. It's not very good reading because they've put so many things in brackets, and it's very, you know, to give it to a non-Muslim even to read it, you know, I found people don't like it. Really, they don't like it. So if I were to give one for reading, I would choose the Quran, which was done by Sahih International, right? Comes out of Jeddah. This is one of the best translations. It flows. It's free of the Old English thous and thys, etc. And it's pretty accurate because it was based partially on the Noble Quran anyway. Right? But the most meticulous in terms of giving the correct explanations is the Noble Quran. A person working with that, inshallah, is on safe grounds. But the other things out there, you know, Yusuf Ali in particular has got major problems. Muhammad Ali also, which was the standard translation used by the Nation of Islam, right? Wherein Muhammad Ali was actually a Qadiani. He was a follower of the false prophet Mirza Ghulam Ahmed. You know, Elijah Muhammad, he got much of his teachings from the Qadianis. And you can see in his book Message to the Black Man that about 2/3 of that text are direct quotes out of the standard text used by the Qadianis, which were in English. You can see it word for word. Plagiarism. Anyway, as I said, it's very important that we are aware that in understanding the words of the Quran, we must use the classical Arabic. Because by taking this step, the seriousness of fortune telling, so great that Prophet ﷺ said, whoever visits a fortune teller out of curiosity, his or her prayers are not accepted for 40 days and nights. This is very serious. Meaning that if you flip open the newspaper and you go to the page of the signs, right? Looking to see what they have to say about Pisces today or Virgo or whatever, you have visited the fortune teller. Because this is the modern day version of how the fortune teller operates. In the past, they used to stay in caves like the oracle at Delphi, ancient Greece, or they had little shops somewhere in the cities. With the newspaper, they eventually got a column, and that's where they now put out their fortune telling. So when you go to it, you are going to the fortune teller. And I know people say, I don't believe in it. That's not the point. You go there, you have gone. And you fall under the heading of one whose prayers for 40 days and nights is not accepted. Of course, some people may say, oh, well, I read it today, no point in praying for the next 40 days. No. You know? No. Because the prayer is not accepted for the next 40 days and nights, it doesn't mean that the obligation of prayer has been lifted. No. Because when we pray, two things take place. One, we remove from ourselves the obligation of Allah on us to pray. And secondly, we earn for ourselves reward. That will depend on how we pray, the level of consciousness by which we pray. The reward will be proportionate. So what is taken from those prayers is the reward. There's no reward. For the next 40 days and nights, no reward. You have lost the reward for those prayers. But the obligation of prayer remains. Because if you abandon the prayer now, you've fallen into a greater sin. Prophet ﷺ has said, the distinction between us and the disbelievers is salah. Whoever abandons the prayer has become a kafir, a disbeliever. So, that is a greater sin. That one who does that would then be doing an act of disbelief. So, I'm just stressing this that for us to really grasp and to understand that we really do need to approach the Quran according to the correct methodology in order to ensure that we understand what Allah has intended here. The fifth level of tafsir is that of Quran by opinion. Yes, there is a place for opinion, but it's on the fifth level. The first four levels are all based on narration, narrated information. Quran by Quran, that's narration. Quran by Sunnah, that's narration. Quran by the Sahaba, narration. Quran by the language, narration. This is all narrated information to us. Where when we step into tafsir of Quran by opinion, now we have stepped out of narration, we're gone now to my opinion, your opinion, etc. At this point, this is opinion for application based on our understanding of the first 4 steps. We now need to apply this thing. We have to use our reason. We have to see the circumstance, grasp the circumstance, see what is applicable here. This is where we have place. And we have to avoid opinionated arguments. If we are following the 4 steps, then in our application, you have an opinion, I have an opinion, but it's in keeping with that 4 steps that we're following. Then we don't need to get into argument. We can discuss, because perhaps there's something which I didn't grasp or you didn't grasp. We can discuss. But to get into an argument where I'm going to say, no, you are this and that, no. It's wrong. We should not get into heated arguments over opinions with regard to the Quran. Prophet ﷺ cursed it, saying, opinion-based argument about the Quran is kufr, is disbelief. And he repeated that 3 times. Then he said, what you know of it, act upon it. And what you're ignorant of, ask those who know. Refer it to those who know. So, following that methodology, inshallah, a person may arrive at the correct understanding and application of the Quran. We can now make tafsir properly. But of course, there are other tools which need to be known, and we will not, our time frame is not sufficient to go through it. I have done a book called Usul al-Tafsir, which is an in-depth analysis of the methodology of interpreting the Quran, where I bring in and discuss all of the major other areas that a non-Arabic speaker may be able to grasp. And there are other areas which I didn't go into because they're deep into linguistic issues which a non-Arab is not going to understand, period. Right? And there's another book also called Ulum al-Quran by Brother Yasir al-Qadi. He has done one which is also excellent, very extensive. That is also another good source if one wants to go in more depth in this field. There's Ulum al-Quran by Ahmed van Denver. It's limited, it's not bad, though it does give something of that information. And there's also Jamal Zarabozo's, how to approach and understand the Quran. That's how he titled it, but it's basically covering the same issues with a lot of depth, a lot of clarity there. Just to understand, as examples of what happens when people don't follow this methodology, I gave you examples from people who have gone into English translations and where it has led them. We can find that the various deviant groups, they also went astray using verses of the Quran to support their deviation. Whether it was the Khawarij, who quoted from the Quran, La hukma illa lillah, that the ruling and decision belongs only to Allah. And on the basis of that, when Ali and Muawiyah radiyallahu anhuma arbitrated their differences to avoid bloodshed amongst Muslims, they broke away. They were among the followers of Ali. They broke away and declared Ali and Muawiyah and those who followed them as disbelievers on the basis of this verse from the Quran. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud went and talked to them. He had a discussion with them. And the first thing he said to them, this group, there's about 40,000 of them, he went to their camp. And when he was going to their camp, he said that he heard a buzzing. On his way to the camp, he heard bzzz, like this. When he came, he realized they were inside of their tents and not reading Quran. And they had marks on their foreheads, of sujood. They were up in tahajjud every night. But in spite of this, they had fallen into a deviation which led them to declare the mass of Muslims to be disbelievers. So when he began his discussion with them, he said, note that there is not a single Sahabi among you. That's the first thing he told them. Not a single companion of the Prophet ﷺ was among them. And they've gone astray. He's pointing out that the way of the Sahaba is critical. If the Sahaba are not going down that way, you're off. And then he asked them, what are your problems with Ali? And they listed their problems. Right? They declared him to be a disbeliever because he sought arbitration. When Allah said, hukum, or rule or decision, belongs only to Allah. And they said when the arbitration was being sought, Ali agreed in the truce that the title Amirul Mu'mineen would not be put before his name. So they said, if he is not Amirul Mu'mineen, he must be Amirul Kafirin. If he's not the leader of the believers, he must be the leader of the disbelievers. And so on. They listen. Anyway, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud dealt with their issue on the Quran. He said, is the blood of human beings more valuable, or is the blood of a rabbit more valuable? I said, of course, the blood of human beings is more sacred and valuable than the blood of rabbits. He said, then he quoted the verse from the Quran in which Allah said that when you're in a state of ihram, if you kill an animal, right, and you're not allowed to kill animals, you're allowed to fish, but you're not allowed to kill land animals when you're in a state of ihram. If you kill an animal, then you must sacrifice an animal of similar value. You kill a cow, you have to sacrifice a cow and give it in atonement for this error that you have made. But if it is an animal which is not from the known groups, if you have killed a rabbit, then you must choose two human beings, two righteous men from among you, and let them choose an appropriate sacrifice for those animals which are not in the main group. So if you killed a rabbit, two righteous Muslims from your group can get together, look and see how much you can afford, whatever, and they can say, okay, you need to kill a sheep, or you need to kill a camel, or whatever. So he said, if Allah can have two men arbitrate over the blood of a rabbit, surely for them to arbitrate to save the blood of Muslims must be permissible. They submitted. That was the understanding. That was the understanding. Taking the verse in the context. I mean, this is context, not just context, but this is fiqh. This is legal understanding. Because one may not have been able to deduce that. If somebody put that in front of us, maybe we'd look at it, we couldn't see. How can you use this as evidence? Where's the relevance here? But you see that fiqh, that deeper understanding, he was able to pull the relevance from that other verse and show how the intended meaning here, when Allah said that the rule only belongs to him, that is a general concept, not a specific principle which then prohibits human beings from arbitrating and deciding in their matters. No. So, if we go then to all of the groups. We could go one after the other. I gave you before the example of the Shia when they talked about Surah Ar-Rahman, where Allah talked about the two seas coming together. They said this meant Ali and Fatima, and that from the two seas came the pearl and the coral. And they said, no, that's not the pearl and the coral, that's Hassan and Hussein. Okay, this is the deviation, right? Because where is the authority? This is just because they believe everything is centered around Ali, Hassan, Hussein and their imams. They need to find the imams there in the Quran. They have to put them in there to justify their claims for their preeminence. So they have brought arbitrary meanings to the Quran, not following that methodology at all. If we follow the methodology of the Quran, where Allah talks about the two seas, you go elsewhere in the Quran, Allah describes who are the two seas. The salt water bodies and the fresh water bodies is clear. But they're not following that. They're going to their own thing, right? And if you look at some of the philosophical groups, you find among them similar deviations, and they're just taking verses from the Quran to justify their deviations. Like the Mu'tazilites, who for them, they held that on a rational level, the Mu'tazilites are called the rationalists. The verse where Allah says, and remember when Abraham said, my Lord, show me how you give life to the dead, and Allah replied, do you not believe? Abraham said, yes, but I'm asking you in order that my heart may find rest. They said rationally, logically, it is not reasonable to accept that a prophet had doubts about Allah giving life to the dead. So he needed his heart to be put at rest with a sign from Allah. This is their argument. Because for them, rationally, the prophets are receiving revelation from Allah, etc., etc. They must believe in Allah 100%. No doubts, nowhere. See, that is their rational approach. Because for them, doubt meant disbelief. For you to have a doubt, this was equivalent to disbelief. So, what they did was they went back to this verse and they reinterpreted it. They said that when Prophet Abraham said, my Lord, show me how you give life to the dead, he replied, Allah says, do you not believe? Prophet Abraham said, yes, I believe, but I'm asking you in order that my companion by the name of heart would be at rest. So this word, qalbi, they said that was the name of his companion. His name was Heart. You see? Now of course we say, where is the authority for this? This is all human mind cannot accept this, so we're going to twist this thing somehow, some way to get out of the obvious. So it is my heart, my buddy by the name of Heart. He needs to get, he needs to see this sign so he will understand this resurrection thing. The other example which we can find among, for example, the Sufis, who focus a lot on the spiritual and they de-emphasize the material world and they get heavy into the spiritual thing, when they go and they look at Prophet Musa, and Allah tells Prophet Musa, اذهب إلى فرعون إنه طغى, go to Pharaoh, for indeed he has transgressed. They say Pharaoh here means the heart, because they're into the thing of purifying that heart. It is your heart which oppresses you, tells you to do the wrong thing. So when Allah is talking about go to Pharaoh, it's meaning go check out your heart. Correct it. Right? Similarly, when Prophet Musa is told by Allah to throw down his staff, they say, no, this didn't mean literally throw down the stick that you had in your hand. Because when Allah asked him, what is in your right hand? And he said, this staff, I use it to herd my sheep and these type of things. He talked about its material uses. He said when Allah told him to throw down his staff, it meant cast aside the material world. You see, you got to focus on the spirit. So of course, we say, where is the authority? It sounds nice, intriguing, but no authority. And of course, not to be outdone, we had Elijah Muhammad claiming prophethood back in the 30s. And we know his basic teachings was that white people were devils and black people were Allahs, and he pluralized Allah, it became Allahs. This is basic teaching. He went to the Quran and found evidence for it. In the translation of Muhammad Ali, of the verse in Surah Taha, verse 102, where Allah says there, يَوْمَ يُنْفَخُ فِي السُّورِ وَنَحْشُرُ الْمُجْرِمِينَ يَوْمَئِذٍ زُرْقًا. On that day, when the trumpet is blown, we will assemble the criminals blue-eyed. So he said, who has the blue eyes? Allah says these are the criminals going to hell. They have the blue eyes. So, of course, when one goes into the classical understandings of this term zurqa, yes, azraq means blue. But when you go into the usage of that description in classical Arabic, it refers to the clouding of the cornea, where it gets a bluish gray tinge where the sight becomes blurred. This is what it's referring to. So a better translation would have been bleary-eyed as opposed to blue-eyed, because blue-eyed has no meaning. It has no meaning. Bleary-eyed is the correct translation. So we can see from this that where we don't follow the correct methodology, then we can end up with all kinds of deviations, justifications for all kinds of interpretations. And a note was just passed to me as a reminder when I mentioned about the Sahabi who went to the Khawarij. I mentioned it was Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. It was Abdullah ibn Abbas, sorry, not Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. Who was known, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud was known as the greatest mufassir or interpreter of the Quran. His interpretations are given precedence over the rest of the Sahaba. Prophet ﷺ spoke about him in particularly glowing terms. Anyway, so when we look at the whole process of interpreting the Quran, we then conclude saying that interpretation of the Quran must be based first and foremost on revelation. Revelation and narrated materials from the early generation, their understanding. The Quran in the context of the Quran, and in the context of the Sunnah, explanation of the Sahaba, in the context of the classical Arabic. This is narrated information from those early generations. This is how we get our foundational understanding of the Quran. After having gone through that route, we now may apply the Quran appropriately in our circumstances using human reason. And this is the correct methodology. This way we end up with what was intended by Allah, or as close as we humanly can arrive. But whenever we skip these stages and jump, directly into language, or we go into English or whatever, what is your statement on dreads or hair braiding by Muslim men, and how do you suggest or advise them? Many who are young and heavily influenced by athletes and so-called stars. Well, of course, wearing dreadlocks is un-Islamic. It's un-Islamic. And it's particularly forbidden because of the fact that it is a symbol of Rastafarianism, a system which believes that Haile Selassie, the former ruler of Ethiopia, was God incarnate. That's their belief. Of course, they claim, that this was sort of like the natural way, and this is how the people back home, it was became like an African thing. But actually, a good friend of mine from Jamaica, who had been living in England, he told me that when he had gone, he and a couple of his friends, they decided to do this tour of Africa, and they'd gone to Egypt, and they had all their hair in dreadlocks, and they had it inside of these big caps that they were wearing, right? For those who don't know what dreadlocks are, I think everybody knows, right? Is there anybody who doesn't know what dreadlocks are? You don't know what dreadlocks? It's people, basically what they've done, they've let their hair grow without combing it, so it just mats and locks up together into these clumps of hair, and you see it. I'm sure you've seen pictures of people with it, long hair, maybe hanging down to their backs. Even white Americans have also taken it on because it's, identified with hip culture or whatever. Anyway, so this group, the Rastafarians, this is a basic practice of theirs. Bob Marley, he was sort of like the expression of that. Anyway, these brothers, so the hair, when it gets real long, what they do, they put it up and they put a cap, which is a kind of a loose knit cap, so it can all fold inside of it. So it's like a thing on top of their heads. So these two brothers, they were telling me that when they went to Egypt, right, they weren't Muslims at the time. They'd gone to Egypt, and they ran out of money. And, they were trying to beg some money. They couldn't hardly communicate. Nobody would give them anything, right? Eventually, they just were so hungry. They went into this restaurant. They tried to beg. Some people were eating. They refused them. And the brother, just in his frustration, he said, "Man, why don't you people help us?" He pulled his hair. His hair came out. The people ran out of the restaurant. I thought he was a madman. I thought he was insane, really. And really, in truth, as they said, really, as we traveled and we went into Ethiopia, and it was the mad people. You have some people, they're insane, they're just wandering the streets. These are the people who have their hair like that. They didn't find any other people, So I thought it was quite comical. Anyway, the point is that to do this is to identify with a culture of kufr, of shirk. And the Prophet ﷺ said, "Man tashabbaha biqawmin fahuwa minhum." Whoever imitates the way of a people is of them. If a sister accepts the interpretations of Ibn Abbas about hijab, is it okay to apply only half of the ruling, wearing the niqab but no gloves? Anyway, I don't know how that came in, because the niqab was not a requirement. It is something commendable. A woman who does it is rewarded by Allah, but it is not an obligation. Of course, there are some scholars who do hold it's an obligation, but the vast majority of scholarship and the evidence, as I have seen it, indicates that it is not an obligation. So if a woman decides to wear niqab and not wear gloves, even wearing of gloves is not a requirement. Or she decides to wear niqab and wear gloves, and she also wants to wear socks, she can do it. But to make that now a requirement for all the women, now this becomes oppressive. And for her to look at the sisters who don't do it as being half-stepping Muslims, they're a couple of notches down, this is again wrong. It's mistaken. We choose to do more, inshallah we get the reward for it. Others who may not be doing what we're doing in that regard may be doing other things in other areas far more than we're doing. So, Allah is the one ultimately to judge those things, and He judges according to taqwa. Where the kafirs, the disbelievers, take on a fashion, it becomes a popular fashion for Muslims to imitate that fashion is wrong. Islamically, you shouldn't do it. You shouldn't do it. Muslims should distinguish themselves from the non-Muslims. Haircuts, almost like the crew cut, where the hair is long on the top and short on the sides. These kind of practices, this is known to be popular non-Muslim fashion. Of course, as Muslims, we should not take these things on. Of course, how you cut your hair, there's going to be some non-Muslims cutting their hair in a similar way. So it doesn't mean to say that the only option for you is to cut your hair in a way that no non-Muslim cuts his hair. No, I'm not saying this. But I'm saying where they have taken on specific fashions. And you can see it, the fashions, they go through cycles. They do this for a while, then they switch to that, and they switch to that. So as Muslims, we should not be following their fashion. When they become like this, we're this. When they become like that, we're that. And no. Prophet ﷺ said, the believer is not imma. He is just like a chameleon. Whichever way this goes, he's there. Wherever it goes that way, he's there. It's just following. He becomes a slave to fashion. The Nike symbols and these things, becoming a slave to fashion, and the labels and these kind of things. The outer garment has conditions that it is not beautiful in and of itself. Very colorful, very flowery, so it becomes a means of attraction, because you are canceling what the purpose of the jilbab is. The purpose of the jilbab is to neutralize yourself, right? That you are not an object of beauty where people are attracted to you because of beauty. So it's not to say, on the other hand, now you have to wear the most crumpled up, wrinkled up, torn up clothing that you go outside in. I'm not saying that either. That's going to another extreme, right? But the point is that your outer garment should be plain. I'm not saying it has to be black, because of course some people say, no, it doesn't have to be black. It's cultural. If you choose black, it's fine. It should be colors which are not themselves bright. Bright yellows or bright, things which are colorful and attractive to the eye. Flowery with embroidery and, things which are all beautification. It's plain old beautification. And you chose that particular khimar or that particular dress because it's beautiful. That's why you chose it. It's attractive. So we need to deal with that and take garments which are neutral, which downplay the attractiveness, the beauty aspect of dress. No, there's no hadith of preference. It only described the women as being like crows. I mean, the crow, the black crow, the garment that they wear in the abaya, which went from the head to the top, from behind at a distance, they would look like a crow in that sense, right? So it described that's how they were dressed, but it was not specifying that was the color. We don't have any specification for color. If a woman sought or desired not to be seen by men, obviously she meant who? Surely not her husband, right? She meant men who she could marry. She tried to avoid being seen by them. And Islam commends that a woman tried to avoid the glances of men, etc., and things which would invite those glances. This is from Islam. What is the first book in English you would recommend for church-going Canadians who want to understand Islam? Well, what I would try to do is I would try to find out from them what do they know of Islam first. And if they know nothing, there's a pamphlet which was done by the Saudi embassy called Understanding Islam and Muslims. I revised it and we printed up and used it for dawah in the Emirates and that region. And I think it is quite simple, it's quite colorful. It shows pictures of Muslims all over the Muslim world, and it has proven itself to be quite an effective means. Also, there's a book which was done by what's the brother's name, Ibrahim Abu Harb from Riyadh. I think it's called Understanding Islam also, or something like this too. It's quite nicely done, good quality. Brother's question, whether the Christians of today and the Jews are the same Christians and Jews referred to in the Quran. Yes, they are the same. By the time the Quran was revealed in the 8th, 7th century, Christianity had already become its distorted state that it is in today. The Gospels are already established, their practices of belief in Trinity, everything was already there. The early years when true Christianity still remained, and there were people upholding monotheism, Tawheed, people like the Bishop of Alexandria, Arius, and other people like James after Jesus' departure in Jerusalem, etc. That ended by the 3rd century. As a force to be reckoned with. After the 4th century, that was finished. From then onwards, Christianity as we know it had established itself. So the Quran was referring to the Jews and the Christians that we know today. What they were doing today, or what they are doing today, they did then. So when Allah says you can eat their slaughter, as you could do it then, you can do it today. You can eat their slaughter. However, the issue, because some people say, oh, they used to slaughter in the name of Allah. No. Back in the 7th century, they were not slaughtering in the name of Allah. You have to bring proof that that was the case. No. The point is that they slaughter, their slaughter we can eat. However, if in the process of their slaughtering, they kill the animal before cutting its neck, then what they are doing is cutting the neck of meta, or a carcass, which we are not allowed to eat. So if it is established that in the process of their slaughtering, they do cut the neck of the animal, even if they cut the neck right off, if they cut the neck of the animal while it is still alive, then that is halal. That's the law. It is halal. And those who argue that no, these Christians are different from the Christians and they have to do it exactly as we do it, and no. These are requirements and arguments which don't have a basis in the practice of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ nor of his Sahaba. When the meat was brought to him from Jews, he ate. He didn't ask them, how did you slaughter? But of course, if somebody comes and informs you that they are slaughtering the animals after they kill them, then you can't eat. Then you can't eat. Or if when they're cooking it in lard, or they're cooking it in other haram, along with other haram materials, they're cooking it along with pork products and things like this, then of course you don't eat because of the issue of it, these other things mixing in with it. But where it is clear and established that they have slaughtered, it is slaughtered by a society which is generally Christian. I mean, again, you don't have to establish that that particular chicken was slaughtered by a Christian in that slaughterhouse, because you do have Sikhs here. You do have others, right? But you are not required to establish exactly who slaughtered that. If you're in a country which is majority Christian, then you are allowed to assume that what is coming to you is Christian. Now if you go to a Sikh butcher shop, don't. You don't. You know, if it's clear he is not a Christian or a Jew, then you don't buy from him. So other than that, the basic principle is that it is permissible. But now, there's another consideration. If you have a choice between buying from Muslims and buying from non-Muslims, one would have to say that it is preferable to buy from Muslims. That Muslims should support each other, encourage in their businesses, to help them be successful so they can give their zakah and benefit the Muslim community. It is important that our monies be circulated as much as we can amongst ourselves. So I would say, though it is permissible where we have a choice, it's better to purchase from Muslim shops, etc., etc. You stated that Muslims should not read the Torah or Bible. I didn't say that. I didn't say that. Isn't it good to have some knowledge of these books for use during da'wah? See, if you understand that I didn't say that, then the other part of the question is not relevant. What I said is that we do not go to the Bible seeking guidance, seeking to know Allah's word. No. We may use verses from the Bible which confirm what the Quran says or what the Prophet ﷺ Sunnah says. We use that to support what supports Islamic teachings. But we don't go in and engage in discussions with the Christians about the interpretations of their texts in areas which Islam does not, or Islamic teachings does not confirm. You know, we don't do it. It's error. You spoke about what we should wear. Are women allowed to wear gold jewelry if it is visible? Rings, bracelets? Should we only wear it at home and weddings, etc.? Well, the general mass of Muslim scholarship holds that women may wear gold. The gold which is on the fingers, rings or bracelets, which naturally if you're not covering your hands it is exposed, this would be a part of the beauty which is naturally exposed and is not impermissible for you. You can do it, right? I mean, if one wore, for example, a nose ring, which was worn in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, you know, a ring in their nose or stud or whatever, for a woman it is permissible because this is a part of ornamentation which it is natural to be worn there. It was done in the time of the Prophet ﷺ and he didn't make any prescriptions pertaining to it. Wearing the wedding ring on the third finger, this is haram. In Islam we have no wedding ring, first and foremost, nor engagement ring. And furthermore, the wearing of the ring on this third finger in Christian tradition is symbolic of one's belief in the Trinity. Any person who watched the coronation of Princess Diana, their marriage, the bishop put the ring by her thumb and said, in the name of the Father, in the name of the Son, in the name of the Holy Ghost, Amen. That is the tradition. So not only is it forbidden from the point of view of it being Christian tradition, not Muslim tradition, wearing of a ring, a wedding ring. We don't have any wedding rings, so it's imitation. It is also shirk. It represents a belief of shirk, and so as Muslims we should not wear it. Wearing on the right hand was the sunnah. You said that if you read your fortune in the newspaper or anywhere else, your prayer is not accepted for 40 days and nights. What if you didn't know about this? Will your prayers still be nullified? No. If you didn't know, and you did it this morning already, your prayers are not nullified. But now you know if you go and do it tomorrow, your prayers will be nullified. What if you go to read your fortune but don't believe in it? Will your prayers still be nullified? Yes. That's what we said. There are two narrations concerning going to the fortune teller. The first one is going out of curiosity. Your prayers are invalidated, or the reward is taken away for 40 days and nights. If you go and believe in it, the Prophet ﷺ said, you have disbelieved in what I brought. Means you disbelieve in Islam. It is an act of disbelief. Which duty is more obligatory? Marriage or seeking knowledge? Well, seeking knowledge is a basic obligation on all Muslims. Marriage is an obligation. Well, a number of scholars do hold as an obligation, or generally a recommendation for those who are able. But seeking knowledge is on you. You cannot say I'm unable. No, you have to go seek it. Everybody is able to seek. Now whether you're able to get the knowledge or not, that's another issue. But seeking that knowledge, this is an obligation on you till you die. Marriage is a strong recommendation once you are able. As Prophet ﷺ said, Ya ma'ashara shabab man istata'a minkum al-ba'a falyatazawwaj. O young men and young women, whoever among you is able to get married should get married. And we as parents should encourage our sons and daughters to marry early. Delay of marriage promotes corruption. I know when my son, who was 16, got married, people were shocked. Why are you married 16 years old? It's too young. No. It is the sunnah to marry young. Is the wearing of the nose ring okay, or should it be worn only in the home? It is okay to wear it. It's okay to wear it. Our sister's question is, young people delaying marriage for secular educational purposes, is that permissible? Is this included in the seeking of knowledge? Well, the seeking of knowledge that we said, which was obligatory, this is religious knowledge. That is what is obligatory. Now, secular, or we call it academic knowledge, knowledge of the worldly things which benefit us in our worldly affairs, this may be what we call fard kifaya, or a community obligation for some women, for example, to learn medicine, to be able to treat women, and dentistry, to be able to treat women, so that the women are not put in a position of haram where they go to male doctors or male dentists. So it is obligatory on the community to produce some female dentists and female doctors, gynae doctors, OB-GYN doctors. So that is a community obligation. Marriage is a strong recommendation, and it is better if a woman has reached the age of marriage that she get married and pursue her education, if she's going into those areas which are beneficial, along with it. And it's very important actually for both males and females in going into fields of study. I mean, we have to be very careful about our intentions for study, what we're going into universities to study. That these fields that we go into, there is some kind of Islamic principles connected with it. The choice of areas to study should be areas which can be utilized and would be beneficial to the Muslim community. Fields of study where a person ends up in some research lab somewhere, making chemicals that God alone knows what they're going to go and do with it in the end. You shouldn't take these kind of fields. You should take very practical, direct benefit type fields where the Muslim community can come to you. We have a need as a community here, for example, in Ottawa. Muslims here have certain needs, whether they are in financial areas, building areas, or whatever. Muslims should go into the fields which will help to fulfill these community needs. Very important, because our seeking of knowledge should not be solely for our own benefit in this field. As the Prophet ﷺ said, and I quoted before, خَيْرُ النَّاسِ أَنْفَعُهُمْ لِلنَّاسِ. The best of people are those who are most beneficial to others. So our knowledge should be not only for our own benefit, but for the benefit of others. The brother's asking whether the research has been done on the methods in North America, the methods used by slaughterhouses in slaughtering. A number of researches have been done. A number. I remember there was a series in the Juma magazine, put out by the Juma magazine. They did about 3 issues where they were gathering a lot of data on and presenting it on slaughter in North America. Their general conclusion was that the slaughter should be avoided because it's doubtful. This is what their general conclusion was from their research. And of course, where one feels doubt, then the Prophet ﷺ said, leave what gives you doubt and go to what doesn't give you doubt. So if you feel uncomfortable, personally, you feel uncomfortable, you feel doubtful about this which is coming to you, and you have a solid basis for that doubt, because of course some doubts don't have a basis, it is emotional or whatever else, and there's some doubts which have a factual basis. Where you have a factual based doubt, then it's better to avoid that thing and go to what doesn't give you any doubt. As I said, Muslims have financial needs. So financial needs meaning what? Not that they need interest-based banks. No, they don't. This is haram. They have financial needs, meaning that we need to develop some financial institutions which will allow Muslims to fulfill certain financial needs, like buying homes without interest, buying cars without having to pay installments and paying interest, and a variety of other things like this. We need to develop financial institutions which can protect Muslims from falling into these major sins. So that requires knowledge of this financial system as well as knowledge of Islamic finance. One needs to combine both to be able to develop alternatives. Now, Ibn Taymiyyah doesn't have a tafsir of Quran. What some researchers have done is they have collected from his rulings and writings, wherever he made some kind of interpretation of verse of the Quran, they've compiled it all together and called it a tafsir by Ibn Taymiyyah. You understand? So it means more than half the verses of the Quran don't have any tafsir or any explanation in that compilation. So he did not sit and write a tafsir, not like Ibn Kathir and others. And he did an introduction to tafsir which identifies these categories in the same way that Ibn Kathir did. Okay, the issue of mentioning the name of Allah over the slaughter. The verse, you have 2 verses in the Quran. Allah says you should not eat that on which other than Allah's name has been mentioned. And you should not eat that on which Allah's name has not been mentioned. 2 phrases. Right? You hear the difference between the 2? That on which other than Allah's name has been mentioned, and that on which Allah's name has not been mentioned. Two things. The scholars of tafsir have interpreted that on which Allah's name has not been mentioned by that on which other than Allah's name has been mentioned. Understand? Meaning that when Allah said that on which Allah's name has not been mentioned, meaning another name other than Allah's was mentioned. That is what is forbidden. Because a Muslim who slaughters an animal and forgets to say Bismillah, can you eat it? Yes. In America, Muslims are buying cars and houses, having them financed with interest and loans. Please elaborate. Haram. Just plain old haram. We don't need too much elaboration on that one. And those people who say it is necessity, unfortunately, we have some people who have promoted this idea of it being necessity. Actually, the first Muslim scholar to say that was Muhammad Abdu in Egypt at the turn of the century. He was the first one to put that out. This is when the colonization was complete there in Egypt. The banks had all been introduced. He made the ruling that it was permissible to take interest because it became a financial necessity. However, this argument is false, because what is classified as durura in the Sharia has been defined by the scholars as that which will cause, a circumstance which will cause either the loss of life or limb. The loss of life or limb. L-I-M-B. Right? Meaning, either you're going to die or you're going to get very ill. Major harm. You need a heart operation. You don't have the money. Nobody will lend it to you. The only way you can do it is get a loan from the bank, save your life. You're permitted to do it. Now, for you to say, I'm going to get that loan. This operation cost me $10,000 or $50,000, whatever. I'm going to get that loan. But since I'm there anyway, let me get another $100,000 and buy a house. Haram. What was enough to save your life, that was permitted. What is above it, 1 penny above it, is haram. So haram that the Prophet ﷺ said interest has over 30 different branches. The simplest of its branches is equivalent to a man having sexual relations with his mother. The loosely used term fees, where a bank or Islamic institution charges you certain fees, these, one has to look at it. Are these legitimate? Because if they're going to do some operation for you, people are hired, people are working, they're calculating, they're making out papers, these type of things, so there are costs involved. So there are legitimate fees that they can charge. But then again, there may also be fees which are illegitimate and becomes just a misnomer for interest. So where we have identified that it is false, it's not acceptable. And I should note, also mention that in the Arab world, interest is called fa'ida. Right? Fa'ida means benefit. They've changed the name from riba, which is, everybody knows is haram, and you don't want to talk about, I'm going to go get my riba. So they now call it fa'ida. And this is one of the signs of the last day about which the Prophet ﷺ spoke, that people would call riba and alcohol by other than its name. You know? Is it obligatory for women to wear socks or cover their entire feet outside their houses? No. I explained that already. Wearing of socks is not obligatory. What I said is they should wear a outer garment which should come down to the tops of their feet, covering the tops of their feet. That is what is required. If they wish to wear socks, they may do so, but it's not a requirement. If you are designated to ask a question, to say Salaam Alaikum here is inappropriate. It's inappropriate. And it's common practice. People want to ask, this is Salaam Alaikum. No. No. Salaam Alaikum, when you're meeting a person for the first time, you say Salaam Alaikum. This is the place for Salaam Alaikum. Right? A scheme by which an institution buys the home for you, and you put in a certain amount of money, they put in the greater amount of money, and you pay something like rent to them. It's like rent to own kind of situation. You have a down payment and then you pay rent, and eventually that rent is counted towards the paying off of the house, and eventually you own it. Not like that? Huh? It's calculated against. Well, you know, the point is that the details of this, one needs to go back to scholars of Islamic finance. You know, where you have an institution which has a board of reputable Muslim scholars, and they have identified and analyzed the details of this, because you're giving me something of it and there may be other details which I'm not aware of, etc. You know, so I wouldn't want to make any pronouncements in this area. You know, where you have a reputable board and they have deemed this particular transaction permissible Islamically, then you go on the basis of that ruling. You know, if you have doubt about their ruling, then avoid it. You know, otherwise, as Allah tells us, we ask those who know if you don't know. So you go to the institution, they say we have this board, it has such and such a scholar on it, such and such a scholar, we know these to be reputable scholars, and they have ruled this is permissible, then you go along with it. If it was not, and they deliberately made it permissible when it really wasn't, then they carry the sin. You have done your part. Your part is you have gone to the knowledgeable and you have gotten a ruling from them. That's what I say, okay? The issue of car insurance, where the use of a car becomes necessary to earn the money to feed your children. Without the use of that car, you are unable to earn that which would feed your children, and forcing you to beg instead, you know, then you have a situation here of necessity. So in this case, they permit insurance, but it should be third party, you know, the minimum. Anytime one is in a forced circumstance, you're only allowed to do the minimum necessary to fulfill what is required. If the credit card is functioning as what they call a debit card, meaning that you have a fixed amount there which you can use and you're not signing any contract of interest, then it is permissible. But once you sign a contract of interest, meaning if you overdraw, you have agreed to pay interest, then that card is haram. If you bought a home on interest before you became a Muslim, Prophet ﷺ said, Al-Islam yajubbu ma qabla. Islam cancels what came before it. Just to repeat that, if a person has a checking account which has no interest, but you can only get that checking account by getting a savings account which would give you interest first, and you don't put any money in the savings account, so you're not accruing any interest, is that arrangement halal? Well, one would have to say, when you make your contract with the bank, you sign a contract agreeing that you would receive interest. That is haram. Whether you actually do or you don't, the signing of that contract is haram. Prophet ﷺ said 4 people are involved in the interest: the witness, the one who draws up the contract, the one who gives it, and the one who receives it. So once you have signed that contract, whether you actually receive it or you don't receive it, you have entered into an interest contract or interest transaction, which is haram. The witness. No, I'm meaning if you do a business deal, for example, and there's interest involved in that business deal and you need witnesses, all those who sign that contract as witnesses to that contract, they fall into the sin also. We'll stop. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika, nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant.